Hi, I'm Joe Smith, Bureau Director for Weights and Measures in the state of Wisconsin. We are at the Bureau of Weights and Measures Metrology and Fuel Quality Laboratory. And what we do is we house the state standards for mass or volume or length, and we calibrate different standards, whether it's an inspector standard or a service company standard, to make sure that those standards are traceable back to the national and international standards. So a pound is a pound, a gallon is a gallon. We test that here and we calibrate those devices and those artifacts here. So this is the Weights and Measures Laboratory Volume Lab. And here we're testing vessels that contain liquid. And we're calibrating those vessels to make sure that 5 gallons is 5 gallons or 100 gallons is 100 gallons. We use water as our standard. We fill up our calibrated vessel, and then we fill up the customer or the inspector's vessel and make sure that 5 gallons is 5 gallons and 10 gallons is 10 gallons. Here would be a 5-gallon test measure, and what happens here is the inspector would fill up at a gas station 5 gallons through this top of this neck, and they would then read the meniscus on this test measure as the fuel would come up, and this tells you how accurate or not that dispenser is.
Right now we are in the Weights and Measures Fuel Quality Laboratory that's adjacent to the Metrology Laboratory. Okay, this is the one and only state fuel quality laboratory in the state of Wisconsin. The main driver for that is for the sake of uniformity and standardization and processes and having the same folks and the chemists to perform the work. It just lends credence to more accurate results. We test probably about 5,000 individual samples in a calendar year. In addition to that, we would probably run through about 6 to 7 unique tests per sample. So we're talking about 30,000 plus individual sample results that have been generated here at the Fuel Quality Laboratory. We test those samples against very strict standards, ASTM specifications, following ASTM test methods, against various limits. We're trying to make sure that the fuel that consumers use and fill up with is fit for purpose and it's a good quality product. So like the Weights and Measures side that checked volume dispense to make sure that consumers get the appropriate amount, we actually test the fuel at the composition to make sure, again, it meets the specifications and that fuel is good for use, and you'll have very limited, hopefully not at all, any issues with your vehicle as you're rolling down the road. So right now we're standing in the small mass laboratory of the Wisconsin Weights and Measures Metrology Lab. Small mass laboratory, this is our high precision laboratory, and we do calibrations in here from 5 kg or 10 pounds down to about 1 milligram. You know what's really unique about this room right here is the small mass lab is on its own isolated slab or separate foundation from the rest of the facility. The reason why we do that, we're in close proximity to the belt line, and you know, one of our factors to mitigate outside interferences, vibrations, like could potentially affect our weighings on the balance. Again, we're on an isolated slab to again mitigate those outside interferences. Additional steps we take is we have sticky pads at the main points of entry in here because we don't want the dust debris to settle on the weights or the balances affecting our measurements. We have a whole bunch of standards. We compare our customer standards against laboratory standards as we do the calibration. Right next to me here is a state primary standards or reference standards. They were issued to all Weights and Measures Metrology laboratories in 1969, actually, a whole set of state reference standards. These standards are part of our traceability hierarchy. So when a customer brings an artifact in for calibration, we'll calibrate them against our working standards, which are located next to each one of the balances. And our working standards are traceable to the state reference standards. Any standard that we use is traceable back to the international standard, which is in NIST, NIST. They're a regulatory body that oversees what we do here. Yeah, what I have in front of me here is just a typical 30-pound weight kit. Now, each one of 33 Wisconsin field inspectors have one of these kits, as do several Wisconsin licensed service companies. This is a typical kit. Pound kit going from 5 pounds down to 1/32 of an ounce. And I think it's kind of impressive just to highlight what is 1 milligram. And you know, I just have want to just show you that right here. I'll take this cover off. I'll use a tweezers here. That is 1 milligram weight right there, if you can see that little standard. The precision weights may also be used to check fine spices, for example. You know, vanilla or saffron is very expensive. And, you know, a little bit goes a long way. So we want to calibrate these standards that may be used to check transaction of spices, which something, you know, somebody may not think about typically. Another thing is jewelry scales. You know, obviously jewelry, gold or platinum and the like is very expensive. So the scales that they use, we want to check those, again, to make sure there's equity in the marketplace. This particular balance right here, our Sartorius MCM 6.7, we use this, generally speaking, anywhere from 5 grams on down. Again, you know, when you're dealing with these really fine, small weights here, you must have the appropriate balance to accommodate making these kind of measurements. As you can see with this particular balance, I'll tear it out. This particular one goes out 7 decimal places. Again, very, very, very precise right here. Hence, a separate isolated slab from the rest of the building. These balances sit on 700-pound marble slabs because any little movement at all can change the balance reading. So what happens here is I'll just take a standard, in this particular case, a 1 gram weight. I'll open up the door right here and carefully put it on the pan and close. And again, this particular weight at 1 gram is our working standards. So I'll wait for the balance to settle, and ultimately I will push tare or zero it out, and then I will take the customer's 1 gram weight and we'll weigh by difference to see if that particular nominal is in tolerance or not. Because what our customers come to us for is for us to issue them a certificate of calibration. And that's our product, is issuing that report. A certificate of calibration that those items that are used to check commercial weighing devices have been calibrated and are NIST traceable. And that's what we can afford to them.
We're in the Bureau of Weights and Measures laboratory, the large mass laboratory. And here we calibrate large mass standards that may used to be calibrated vehicle scales or any other large mass device. Here we would have a weight cart. We would calibrate this weight cart and ensure that it meets the mass that it's rated for. And then the customer, when they're out in the field, would put in their standards and inspect things like a vehicle scale. Some of the larger masses that we might do is maybe at a junkyard. They may have really large capacity scales that may measure a volume or a mass of metal. And so these really large standards are used to inspect those scales and make sure they're accurate. For commerce and for inspecting roads, for instance, to make sure they're not, the semis are not overweight, there's a plethora of scales that actually will basically measure the mass of a semi to make sure that it's within the correct weight so that the roads don't become beat up by having really heavy semis. Commerce is best when it's uniform throughout the country. And so what this lab does is they have traceability back to the national and international standards. So it's really important here that we inspect this equipment and make sure that this equipment meets those specifications for the national and international standards as well. Consumers should really make sure that they know that we're doing the best we can to make sure a pound is a pound, a gram is a gram, a gallon is a gallon. And it takes a lot of time and effort by the team here to make sure that things are standardized across the state and match up with other states and the country as well as internationally so that people can have accurate commerce. Anytime there's a consumer transaction happening, Bureau of Weights and Measures is trying to make sure that it's accurate and fair for both the consumer and the business owner.